Hey everybody, it's Jean Chatsky. Thanks so much for joining me today on Her Money. So I'm sure I am not the only one of you who can say I've gotten a message on Facebook from somebody I barely know saying, "Hey girl, I haven't seen you in a while. You look amazing. Do you want to look even better at your next event? Well, buy my mascara and I'll throw in a free gift. But hurry, sale ends at midnight." Yeah, those messages. While it might be really easy to brush them off, roll our eyes, and hit delete, which by the way I try to do, a surprising number of women in America right now are caught up in these businesses, and many of them are multi-level marketing schemes. Don't worry if you haven't heard the term, we're going to unpack it. It makes sense too, because if you are a woman living in America, rural America, trying your best to balance raising kids and help provide for your family, then the idea of being able to work on your own schedule and make way more than you would make working at a regular part-time job sounds really appealing. The problem is the vast majority of those people, 99+% who join an MLM, a multi-level marketing company, make no money or lose money and wind up stuck with inventory that they can't sell to recoup their losses. In her new book, which is called Selling the Dream, the billion-dollar industry bankrupting America, Jane Marie chronicles the rise of MLMs in America and why they particularly target women with lofty promises of being able to be your own boss and make millions and millions of dollars in easy income. Jane Marie is a Peabody and Emmy award-winning journalist, a former producer of This American Life, and the host of the wildly popular podcasts The Dream and DTR. One quick announcement before we jump into this interview. We love our Her Money community, and we want to thank every one of you who has recently taken a sec to review the show. One of those listeners recently wrote and made me blush and said, "Jean covers the most important issues that uniquely impact women financially, and we need spaces to talk about it. This is a very valuable resource and a must listen in my rotation." Thanks so much for that. When you've got a sec, please drop us a review on Apple Podcasts because we know they really do make a difference, as does my guest because she lives in the podcast world. Jane, it is such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jean. Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the book, for listeners who don't know about your incredible career in narrative audio, I know you started out on This American Life, which is basically the gold standard of audio storytelling. And then you created your own podcast called The Dream, which has covered pyramid schemes, the world of wellness, and life coaches. From season
Yes.
one, I know that your family has a history with doTERRA, which is an MLM. Is that what set you off on this quest? Is that why you started The Dream in the first place? And if it isn't, tell us the backstory.
I can tell you the backstory. My family has a history in a million companies. The one that they are still, well, there's a many that they're still involved in, but it's Young Living Oils, which doTERRA is an offshoot of that company, but you can read all about that in my book. It's a fascinating story of how both of our biggest essential oil MLMs are kind of connected to each other. The way the podcast got started is that I had a podcast production company. I had just finished hosting the Tinder podcast, DTR, and I started a podcast production company where we were making shows for hire for other people. And Laura Mayer at Stitcher gave me a call one day to see if I would produce a show. And her pitch was, it's about MLMs. And I said, do you have an hour? Like, how much time do you have for this call? And I talked her ear off for a while. And we got off the phone and she said, I'll call you back. And she came back and said, why don't you also host it since you have this great family history and experience with these companies? And then kind of I got to make whatever I wanted to make out of that show. And it was a little overly ambitious. It's not the kind of podcast that makes anybody money, but I think it's an important story that needs to be told. So that's how I got involved in looking into this world. And that's where I've been living for about 7 years, in the world of MLMs. Well, just outside, kind of peeking in the window.
What has the response been like?
Wonderful and surprisingly positive. I was scared kind of in the beginning. The world of multi-level marketing is litigious, and I was afraid of getting a cease and desist or something, but I've had hardly any negative feedback. It's been really wonderful. And it's actually like a new community that I'm involved in, the anti-MLM movement, since the show came out in 2018 and now the book. It's such a different world. There's so many people talking about this, whereas back then, a short time ago, we weren't all speaking about it. So now I'm just so glad that there's this big community that's come up talking anti-MLM.
It's actually a great customer service, I think, that you've done. Just because and it's not an easy world to crack. I've been a personal finance reporter for a really long time, and I've tried through the years when I was at Money Magazine and even before that at Smart Money to sort of dig in. And these companies are wily.
They're wily.
They lawyer up really quickly. So I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about your MLM history and your experience, and then we'll get into what they are today and how people can protect themselves. You got pulled into an MLM, you say, when you were 18. What were you going through at that time that made it appealing?
I was at 18, a high school dropout. I had too many years of going to raves in Detroit and not going to school. I moved out of the house and was doing a lot of drugs and all that stuff and just trying to, at that point, get my life back in order. I was living back with my dad, and there were a couple of MLMs that came up in my life right around the same time. One of them was one I found on an infomercial. It was a business where you sell things in the back of magazines, but the larger part of the business was recruiting your friends and family to also sell things out of the back of magazines. And then the next one was a lingerie company. And I had a party at my house that when I got my own place, my friend said, "Can I use your apartment to have this party? It'll be really fun. We're going to just try on clothes." And she came in with the rack and everything with lingerie hanging off of it. And I think I got a hostess gift. And people did sign up that day at my house. But I did not realize when the invitation happened, when the offer to host this party, I didn't realize it was an MLM. Which is silly because I have so much history in my family. Like, I've grown up going to Tupperware parties and Avon and all of that stuff. Yeah, so even I got a little bamboozled, but.
Let's back up and explain the difference. I mean, when we think of an Avon, when we think of a Tupperware, we don't necessarily think of things that are dangerous or harmful. What are MLMs today? Are there good ones? Are there bad ones? How do you recognize the pitch, and how do you know the difference?
So MLMs today are companies where they're shaped like this. A couple people at the top, then they recruit 5 people, then each of them recruit 5 people, then each of them recruit 5 people, and it ends up looking like a pyramid. The way they make money these days is, or the vast majority of them, is charging kind of a fee for entry to get in on the bottom. It's usually in the hundreds of dollars, and sometimes you get a little bit of product to play with or put in your kit or in your trunk or whatever. And that's where the money is flowing from into the pyramid. Those folks at the bottom there have very little to no success. It's really hard, especially if you get in kind of late in the game, to find a customer base, to develop the relationships that you need to keep the scheme going. And so those people often quit really quickly. And there's not enough statistics on this because the companies don't keep track of people coming and going, and the participants aren't encouraged to be good at accounting for that. So the folks at the bottom rotate in and out very quickly. One woman I spoke to for the show said, we are like a bathtub with the drain open, just constantly flushing out that bottom rung. But there are enough people wanting to replace those folks that the money keeps flowing upwards. In terms of whether there's a good or a bad one, I think it's a really bad business model. I don't think it's a good place to start if you are starting a business. I believe that it's kind of scammy to its core. The older companies like Avon and Tupperware have on their side longevity, and they've kind of embedded themselves in like the fabric of America. So those ones are seen as better in that we all probably have a piece of Tupperware at our house. Maybe not anymore. It was much more popular when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s. But no, I don't think that there's a good MLM. I think when you look at that business model, and if you're a business owner, when you choose to build your business that way, you're making a choice to potentially hurt a lot of people. And for one example, when the Amway guys got started, so everyone's heard of Amway, they did not have a product. They knew that they wanted the model. They had worked somewhere else that used the model. They knew that the model was good, but they didn't have anything to sell. And they went out shopping for something. And it had to have a few qualities, one being something everybody buys and something that the FDA wouldn't come after because the place they'd worked prior was a vitamin company. So they built the company and then said soap. And it really didn't matter. It didn't matter what it was. They just chose something kind of innocuous, and that's how Amway got started.
I think you're right that we have all heard of Amway and probably been at one of these parties for some sort of product, whatever they happen to be. Why are they still so appealing to so many people? I mean, you made the point that people that they flush the lowest tier down the drain, or they let it roll down the drain, but there's a free supply of people who are willing to step in and try to be the next $1 million sales rep. What is it about the pitch that has legs?
It sounds great. I would sign up if it was true. So if you believe that it's true, if you buy the pitch is you are going to be completely in control of your life. Easily. No training, couple $100. This is like the cheapest business proposition. You don't have to invest in a building, or every other business is going to cost you a lot more money to start your own business. This is your own business on your own time. You can make as little or as much money as you want. All of the pitch, the promises are wonderful. Again, that would be awesome. And I think just not enough people know it's a complete lie, that there is hardly a chance, infinitesimal chance that you will make even $1. And beyond that, there's been studies done where people have looked at the income disclosure statements that say 99% of people make nothing and only 1% make $1. And people are different in that some people look at that chart and say, of course I'm in the 99%. Why would I ever sign up for something like this? Bye. And then there are half of us who look at it and go, I'm a 1%er. And this is my easy way to validate that, is I can become a 1%er in this organization. And it's kind of similar to playing the lotto. Like yesterday, I bought a Mega Millions ticket because it's at $1 billion. So it's very similar to that, except that these companies then continue, there's not just $1 that you're spending or $5 on a lottery ticket. It becomes, you keep having to spend more. There isn't a lot of money coming in from elsewhere. It's really just it gets sucked out of you. Yeah.
Well, explain that. I mean, as you progress through your selling journey, whether you're pitching a food product or something else, or oils or whatever, they get a couple $100 from you for buying that starter kit that maybe gives you a little bit of product. What typically happens then that leads people down the path, and at what point do people realize, oh my God, I'm so done?
Okay, well, what typically happens next is your upline, whoever recruited you, or someone in the organization above you says, Actually, that 199 starter kit you got started with is like the janky version. You probably want to spend about 500 more to get your complete kit of all of the Cutco knives or whatever you're selling. You want everything on you. And so that's money spent. And you need to be having parties all the time. You need to be hosting events and getting out there in the world. So you've got gas, you have to have a cell phone, you have to host people at your home, food, drinks, all of that stuff. So then you're out that money. Then you start recruiting people, and their buy-in counts as part of your sales goals for the month, let's say. Those recruits count toward your sales goals. You get up to what, let's say $1,000 that month. You get to keep about 20% of that, but that's still not making back our initial investment. So you get to $1,000, you up your rank, and then you have maybe 5% more commission. So instead of $200, you get $250 from that $1,000. And then often, and I've talked to so many people who end up doing this, but once they make that next rank, it's really hard to keep up the recruiting and make sure everybody's recruiting other people, and that this endless chain keeps happening. And a lot of times when someone makes a new rank and then they don't make that dollar amount that they need to in sales to keep that rank, I've met so many people who just put it on a credit card. They just make up sales. They buy the product themselves just to keep their status in the company. That's a super common story. There are some people who've made money. I talked to my friend Danielle that I grew up with, who is a higher up in 31 bags. And I think she said it the most ever. She's really high up. She's one of the way top tier people because she got in very early and she's hustled a lot. I think the most she's ever made in a year is $45,000, she said. So for work that I feel is dishonest, it's not the greatest pay. Yeah, so oftentimes people, they get to a point where it takes a long time to get to a point that you're realizing that you're losing money. It's this sunk cost fallacy where you've already invested, the money's spent. Why would I quit now? And your upline is saying, just spend a little more. If you really care about this, is really important to you, just put $500 more into it. Like, come to this conference we're doing and you can learn some things. Conference you have to pay for. Come to that and you can learn some new sales tricks and you can learn some new recruitment tricks. Buy these tools that we offer. They're web videos that our CEO makes for you, and you can buy those and learn how to boost your business. And doing all of that, you end up losing more and more money, but you also feel like it's an investment. You feel like, oh man, I've spent so much on this, I can't just walk away. And then eventually when people do walk away, they're left in this state of both having to identify as a victim and identify as a perpetrator, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's really hard to do. So a lot of people just walk away quietly and don't say anything, don't become an activist, don't tell their friends and family. And if anyone asks, just say, oh, it wasn't right for me, or I wasn't that good at sales, or whatever, or go on to the next MLM. That's very common. But when people walk away, to really realize what has happened, they would have to say, I was victimized, and in turn, I victimized my mom and my neighbor and all of these people. And so I think that's why we don't hear the real story of what happens in MLMs, is because that's so hard.
Yeah, it's worse than all the people that you invited to a party. It's all the people that you convinced to follow you into this sales experience, which
that's right.
in turn became expensive and ugly. Chapter 2 of your book is titled Women's Work. And obviously there are MLMs that specifically target men. But you write that women make up 74% of the MLM workforce, and the majority of MLM companies sell things traditionally known as women's products. Why is this a woman's world?
Well, going right back to the early history of MLMs, they were adjacent to door-to-door sales 100 years ago, right? And there came a point where door-to-door salesmen got a bad rap right around the time that we started making cities. So before industrialization, everyone lived in a rural area, and you didn't necessarily have a store nearby. So the guy coming by and knocking on your door and saying, I have a mop for sale, was the way to get stuff. Then as things progressed, that you did have somewhere to drive, and a strange man coming by your house and knocking on your door wasn't the best. You didn't necessarily want to open the door to this person. And so a few of the very early MLMs, Avon, Tupperware, recognized this and said, well, why don't we have our feet on the ground be women, like exclusively? And one early MLM that got shut down by the FTC was called Holiday Magic. And they had their entire sales force on the ground floor, the bottom of the pyramid, were called Holiday Girls. They were a makeup company. And Holiday Girls had their little trolley thing that they would pull around the neighborhood and go door to door talking to people about this makeup. So that worked because people were much more comfortable inviting a woman into their house. Women had very vast and deep social networks of other people that would want to join this scheme. So it was very successful for the early companies. And I think that kind of started us on this trajectory of what we're going to sell in MLMs is makeup and jewelry and diet shakes. But also women have remained to this day a population that has upward mobility is more difficult, especially in communities where, religious communities where women are supposed to stay home and take care of the children. In homes with children, even if you're not supposed to stay home and take care of them, statistically, we are the ones doing the caretaking. So we have less time to devote to our corporate jobs out in the world. And so this idea that you could work at night after the baby goes to bed, or you can work on the weekend. Also, you have a good excuse to get away from the kids on the weekend because you have to throw a party or whatever it is, really appealing to women primarily. Yeah.
Not just women, but you mentioned religion, right? And
yeah,
Utah is basically the MLM capital. It's the capital of the MLM world. Is that just because of religion? Are there other things in the way that state operates by law that have made it the MLM capital?
Well, and I think that's something that I'm trying to correct in the book, is the idea that, those sucker ladies in Utah, the Mormons, some people say MLM stands for Mormons losing money, but it's not the religion in Utah that does it. It's the laws in Utah. It is known as the fraud state. There has been a long history of attorney generals and governors and many folks that run the state government in Utah passing laws where it's very hard to go after fraudsters. And one of them is this pyramid scheme law where you just can't prosecute anything for being a pyramid scheme. So it has become a state similar to, how if you're starting an LLC, you start it in Delaware, right?
Yes.
You put the address in Delaware because then you have fewer taxes and all that. If you're starting an MLM, you put the address in Utah. And now Utah has more MLMs per capita than any other state. But the reason you started there is because they don't come after you. It would have to be a federal investigation or lawsuit, but the state isn't going to be the one to really look into your business practices.
The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, as you noted, shut down Holiday Girls, but in your book you call them the Federal Trade Clowns. So it seems like you have a pretty strong opinion that they're not shutting down enough of these. What is happening in terms of regulation and law?
They're trying to pass a few new regulations that require, for example, more transparency around what the business opportunity is and what the numbers really look like from these companies, because they're not currently required to expose anything about historical data about people who've been involved in this scheme. So there are some things on the table that the FTC is trying to push through, but this is wild, and this is what I would love to have change somehow, but their job is so enormous and they are so tiny. They are in charge of all scams, all of them, like credit card scams and someone calling you from another country and taking your grandma's retirement and all of that stuff. Any kind of scam you can think of, identity theft or false product claims, like selling something that isn't really what it says it is. And then MLMs. And I think the difficulty in them prioritizing the MLM research and initiatives to get rid of them is that people are willing to be part of them. They don't get a lot of complaints at the FTC for the reasons we were talking about earlier. Why would you write a letter saying, I think I got scammed here, if you're not willing to admit that you also scammed a bunch of other people? So MLMs kind of escape their view often. And so I want to encourage people that if you have had an experience, and if it has been one of the 99%, an experience that 99% of people have, let the FTC know and let them know you weren't happy the whole time, because it is very difficult for them to get the evidence they need out of people in this world.
Scams come typically in waves, right? There are flavors of the month. I've been seeing on Instagram and TikTok recently overjoyed people saying they only work 2 hours a day selling quote unquote network marketing, and that you can do this too, right? First of all, what are these people selling? And is this an MLM? And what other flavors of the month are you seeing?
If there's any element where you have to build a team, that's an MLM. If there's any, build a team, build a downline, recruit friends, introduce sharing. If there's a word sharing anywhere, run. Those are all multi-level marketing schemes. I think the newest ones there's one called master resale rights, which I don't totally get why this is so appealing, but it's supposedly an opportunity to sell a class about how to sell a class to people who want to sell a course in reselling classes, like self-improvement stuff.
Sounds great.
Yeah. And that's really popular right now. There's also a credit card one called Transact Card, which is a MLM. If you go to a website, if one of these things comes across your For You page or whatever in TikTok, go to their website, go to the About page, and usually in the list of our history and how to get a hold of us and all of that stuff, it'll say how to join or how to make this part of your life or whatever, join our success and that sort of thing. And you click that and it says sign up here. It's a no-go.
When you decided that you were going to put all of this in a new book, what was your hope? What are you looking to see change, and how do you want that change to happen?
I guess the best I could hope for is that the real story of what actually happens to people in MLMs, I would like that to be the dominant narrative. So coming into doing this research, I couldn't believe the failure rates, and then the fact that no one's talking about it. Like that just, it felt so strange that this is a world that no one succeeds in, and yet the main story is you can have a Ferrari. Like, how is that possible? That the reality just isn't out there. So that really, like, my goal kind of stops there. Like, I just want us talking about it. I want people to understand the truth, and if they still choose to do it, so be it. But I think it's about us just having more conversations around the reality of these companies. In the long run, scammer is going to scam, right? Like people are going to figure out another scam if we get rid of this one. But I think vigilance on the part of the people, on the part of the public, is the real antidote to that. So I was hoping to open some more eyes and ears.
Well, I think you've absolutely done that. You've certainly done it with the conversation today. If our listeners want more from you and more about you, where would you like them to go?
My handle everywhere is C. Jane Marie. It's SEE Jane Marie. They can listen to The Dream. They can listen to the audiobook of Selling the Dream, which sounds like a podcast.
Amazing how when us podcasters read our own books, it ends up sounding just like one. Jane, thank you for this. This was hugely educational and fascinating, and I appreciate your work.
Appreciate you too. Thanks, Jean.
Thanks.